I can give you examples of cases where whistleblowers have been killed.
The late Cindy Somakaka gave me documents in 2016 and he was later shot and killed in 2017.
We all know of the case of Roneval Krecher. We all know of a case of Rasuche.
Even our colleague was being assassinated in 2016, but today there's nothing.
As well as the recent one that has been count down for the PPE tenders.
As whistleblowers, as an anti-corruption activist, we are no longer being killed by criminals and dirty and crook politicians. We are now being killed by the state.
Welcome to the Big Debate. I'm Ridi Tlhabi. Thank you very much for joining us. An oil refinery in South Durban explodes, causing life-threatening pollution to spill into the air. An Australian mining company bulldozes ancestral and agricultural land in the Eastern Cape. 144 patients die after being moved from proper mental health institutions to unregulated facilities. What do these tragic events have in common? Well, in every case, people of conscience tried to report the events to the authorities to prevent disaster and death. And in every case, those people of conscience or whistleblowers became the target of attacks, even assassination. It seems in South Africa, when you try to call out corruption and malpractice, you become a target. In some cases, our whistleblowers are trying to save billions of rands being looted from government coffers. And instead of being praised, the whistleblowers often lose their jobs and livelihoods. How do we change our culture and practice so that those who protect us from wrongdoing are themselves protected? Well, joining me now are John Jeffrey, Deputy Minister of Justice. We have Musilo Mutepu, author of Uncaptured and the former CEO of Trillion, who blew the whistle on billions of rands of corruption. Shirice Thakur, Advocacy Coordinator of Amabungani Center for Investigative Journalism, and Nonhle Mbutuma from the Amadiba Crisis Committee in the Eastern Cape. Of course, we also have Des Desai of the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance, and in our virtual audience, many other concerned South Africans are joining us. Welcome to all of you. Welcome. And welcome to you at home. Remember, you can join the conversation using the hashtag on your screen. Now, before we start our discussion, just take a look at this.
Babita Deokaran died in a hail of bullets on 23rd August 2021. She had been working on exposing corruption in the Gauteng Health Department, where public officials were allegedly stealing money. Sadly, hers is just one of many cases of whistleblowing that ends in tragedy.
We are dying!
When the engine refinery in South Durban blew up for the umpteenth time in December 2020, the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance sounded the alarm on malpractice, which has had deadly results for their community.
At this particular refinery, we've had over 30 explosions and fires since 1995. They never speak the truth of what really happened.
My husband worked in the petrochemical industry for 18 years, and then he later contracted a cancer, a rare form of oral cancer, from working with these chemicals. And he subsequently, he didn't overcome the disease and he didn't make it.
My family and I have suffered a great deal from the pollution, and my mom's late with cancer, and my sister now has lung cancer.
Activists who have been blowing the whistle on refineries that continue to violate their permit conditions have paid a high cost for speaking up.
If you speak up, you're out the gate. You're out of the job.
I just heard bang. And when I look at the fire, a ball of fire that came into the house, a petrol bomb, my children, my wife, all traumatized. I still bear the scars of it.
The government says that the protection of whistleblowers is non-negotiable.
There have been brave men and women of our country who, because of their abhorrence of corruption, blew whistles. And I regret that in many instances we have not treated them well. And we therefore need to have some process, legislation, of being able to protect whistleblowers.
But communities like this one in Durban are tired of promises and are demanding action.
With elections coming up, there's a lot that you guys could do to satisfy the community of Wentworth and residents like myself, to prevent us from losing our loved ones to diseases like cancer asthma, and other terrible, disastrous things that occur here. And I do hope that elections inspire you to move.
Deputy Minister, let me start with you. Why are we not doing more to protect whistleblowers?
Look, we've got two pieces of legislation. The one is the Protected Disclosures Act, which is around protecting whistleblowers in the workplace. One of the participants had said, if you speak up, you're fired. The aim of that act is to prevent that. That act is a 2000 act. It was updated quite recently, 2017. In the process, it was put out for public comment. Then there's the Witness Protection Act, which is about protecting witnesses, not just necessarily whistleblowers, but witnesses in criminal cases when they're giving evidence or assisting with the investigation. Those are the two pieces of legislation, both of whom we can always improve. We can always look at suggestions as to how they can be improved.
Isn't part of the criticism, though, Minister, that the law has limits? It protects employees in the workplace. But outside of that, if you are community members, there's not enough protection.
Protected disclosures is specifically around stopping that, the point that I made earlier, where one of the people in the video was saying, if you speak up, you're out the door, you're fired. So that's what the Protected Disclosures Act is trying to do. The other issue then is physical security for witnesses, for whistleblowers. To some extent, that is in the Witness Protection Act, although that act really requires a temporary removal from society, and that's not suitable for a number of people. I think the problem is that in South Africa, life is cheap, and people are prepared to kill for small amounts of money and very little motivation. So it's also a societal problem that we've got.
So Musilo, the company that you led was getting bogus contracts and payments from state parastatals like Eskom and SAA. You blew the whistle at great cost and risk to yourself. Are you happy that we do have legislation to protect people such as yourself?
Absolutely not. With all due respect, the Protected Disclosure Act needs to be torn apart, and we have to start from the beginning. It's a labor issue where you cannot suffer occupational detriment. So you will be fired, you'll be suspended, and then you have big corporates who have large, deep pockets, like Trillian did, and you fight from the outside. I had a legal bill of 1,300,000. I haven't received any protection from a South African government. I did have support from PLAF, which is the protection of whistleblowers in Africa who are based in Paris. For example, when I implicated Lynn Brown with the Trillian Eskom payment, it was PLAF who flew me to Paris. And in terms of criminal investigations, Trillian laid 9 criminal charges. And the Hawks and then PA called me and said, because of the political situation, because of how they're connected to the government, they had to essentially expedite my case. So
let me jump in there. I can hear your voice literally shaking as you recall the details. Maybe you can just spend some time telling us how this affected you emotionally, mentally, and in other ways.
It's tough. It's isolating. I was unemployed for 2 years because I was deemed a political risk.
With all your qualifications as an internationally recognized and trained economist, you couldn't find a job anyway.
Like Temba Maseko says, and like Cynthia Stimpled, corporate SA treats us like lepers. The common thread is you lose your livelihood. South Africa doesn't support you. I've been very, very fortunate that I was given a fairly lucrative contract at MTN. When I went to Zondo, I asked him to change legislation and also protect us physically, protect us from civil and criminal investigation. And like the US and Germany, you need to reward us because we risked our lives and our livelihoods.
Right. Nonhle, let me bring you in here. Xolobeni, you've been protecting sacred and ancestral land where an Australian mining company had been given rights to come and mine. Have you been protected?
On that question of do I feel protected? Here we are dealing with quite a lot of stress and trauma in order to protect our livelihood, our land, our ancestral land. For decades, we've reported many cases, but we don't see the protection come, especially for political reason, and especially if the money is involving the government. Right now, there is no protection at all for the whistleblowers because myself, as I'm already been supported by the environmental NGOs. Otherwise, if I didn't get that protection from abroad, I don't think today I will be still alive. I'm living under a huge stress. Even our colleague was being assassinated in 2016, but today there's nothing. Last week, we're having a full force of police sent in order to push us away from the area, and they are carrying a lot of bullets, and the order was all the bullets must end in my body. But the person that gave me that information, he was afraid of losing his own job.
Okay, thank you, Nonhle.
Yeah.
Deputy Minister, I mean, we hear all the time that South Africans must come forward. It seems like coming forward is a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, and that is a big problem. On the Xolobeni issue, the thing I noted, particularly from what Nonhle was saying, is the gap, I think, is why are the cases that are being reported to the police, why they're not being able to solve those cases, because obviously if the due process of law works, then that's a deterrent to people. On Wasilo's experiences, the law was changed in 2017. So I think that was after her experiences. There is now criminal and civil immunity, indemnity. The issue of reward was something that was looked at in those amendments. Eventually, Parliament opted not to go for it on the basis that it's very few countries in the world that actually have it. I noted that she said she wants a Protected Disclosure Act torn up, and I understand where she's coming from. But then the issue is, let's engage on what amendments should be there. One of the things she raised is the legal costs of being a whistleblower. Yeah, those are areas that one would need to look at. But unfortunately, people tend to sort of stick together and not want to expose people amongst their ranks that are involved in wrongdoing. And when anybody does so, then they don't like it. And that seems to be across the board. And that's a societal issue that we've got to tackle.
Cherise, I know that you study this matter and have compared our whistleblowing legislation against best international practice. Is that it? Is a societal issue?
I think it's so much more than a societal issue. And I understand where Minister Jeffrey is coming from in relation to the 2017 amendment to the Protected Disclosures Act. There were some very welcome changes in that legislation. But if you do a comparative analysis and look at the solutions that have been included in other countries' whistleblower protection laws, South Africa could go much further. So Ghana has got a provision in their law that provides for a whistleblower to request and be given police protection if they are afraid for their safety. And I'd also refer to the Dutch Whistleblowers Authority, which is basically an organization funded by government but independent of government that provides legal advice to whistleblowers, which is something that is completely lacking in South Africa. So in South Africa, what we have is a situation where there are laws in place. The Protected Disclosures Act is not necessarily very user-friendly for a whistleblower who is not very well acquainted with reading and interpreting law. And there are very limited resources for whistleblowers to draw upon to get, for instance, legal advice or legal representation. So there is a law, but the law is not practicable at the moment, and it's absolutely clear that it is not working for whistleblowers. So even though it was amended in 2017, we would say, can it be taken further?
Whistleblowing is not always met with death. Other tactics are also used to scare and isolate the whistleblowers. When we come back, we hear more from our panelists. Welcome back to the big debate on whistleblowers. Now, in South Durban, hidden from most people's view, are several huge oil refineries. It's a multi-trillion rand industry, and yet the air nearby is polluted with dangerous toxins. And at regular intervals, there are fires and explosions leading to billowing clouds of smoke. Rates of cancers and respiratory diseases are some of the highest in the country. The affected communities are in Black, Coloured and Indian townships. I just want to bring in here Des Desire of the South Durban Community Environmental Alliance, and we saw him in our insert earlier. Des, thank you so much for joining us. Just talk to us about what is happening in your community.
Let me say that the whistleblowing issue, firstly, is problematic when you work for the big corporations. They blacklist you. There's been many workers that have been blacklisted and have had to leave the country because the corporations are all linked together. I saw what happened in 2001, that the big corporations are linked to the hit squads, where hit squads are hired behind closed doors. And you are threatened, your lives are threatened, your family is threatened. I know it happened to me. Just after midnight, my family was petrol bombed. Now, I don't live with my family since that time because they were all traumatized. They could never live with all the violence and the onslaught.
Do you know who petrol bombed your house?
I've been very vocal against the big corporations in South Durban, but also throughout the country, against all the atrocities and abuses that communities are taking from these big mining houses, the big oil corporations. And I was told that you are trampling on big toes, you are depriving us of making money, and we are going to deal with you. So they go after your family, they blacklist your family, they make sure that your families become the victim. Not only do you become the victim, but your entire family, and especially my siblings, never were able to work again in the petrochemical industry. And this is a regular occurrence of how they operate.
Let's leave it there for just a moment. The sound is not great, but we get the story, very, very tragic. And that is the reality of being a whistleblower in this particular case. Minister, I just want to go back to that whole area of legislation and how it protects employees. But others are just ordinary members of the community.
Yeah, well, that is what the law should be doing. As I'd said in the beginning, the problem with the Protected Disclosures Act is it's aimed at people, protecting people who are working for a particular company. And amongst the 2017 amendments was to widen the relationship, independent contractors, people who have knowledge of the situation but don't necessarily work there, they work for somebody else, that kind of thing. I would define a whistleblower as somebody who has inside knowledge. So not a community activist who is protesting against a development or pollution or something like that. But they should be allowed to protest, to organize, to raise what issues they want to raise. And we've also got to look at ensuring their protection and that they are not marginalized or threatened in any way.
Isn't there marginalization, Deputy Minister, inevitable? Someone like Nontle took on the might of the state and an international giant company. I mean, it's a David and Goliath type of situation. So these are just platitudes when we say they should be protected. They should be able to protest.
I think the category you're now raising is basically communities that are protest. Obviously, where crimes are committed, it's obvious that the police need to investigate those cases properly. And if they're not doing that, then action needs to be taken. Let's look at other forms of ensuring that there is more tolerance in society for resistance, and particularly when it starts affecting people's financial interests.
I mean, Musilo, when you hear other people sharing their stories of being traumatized by coming forward and everything else that you've lost, was it worth it?
I haven't lost You mentioned David and Goliath. If you remember your Bible, David won. So because of my disclosure, Trillian is in all sorts of litigations with Transnet, with Eskom. It owes SARS, I think 400 million. They're in liquidation. I have been fundamentally changed. I mean, I've had so many miracles happen to me, like the job at MTN and my bank who made me sign an NDA and gave me my title deed. I'm now the minister's, Senzo Mgcunu's special advisor. We're now in water and sanitation. And I'm using my financial know-how to bring water to the South African people. And my story interested Penguin, and they gave me a wonderful contract. And I'm starting to speak with different corporates just to talk about the strength and resilience of the human spirit. So for me, as a Christian, I have lost nothing. God tested me. And not only did he restore me, he elevated me. I will do it again 1 trillion times. South Africa is worth my sacrifice.
I mean, Cherise, obviously the story ended well eventually for Musilo, but that's not the reality for so many people. How do we make it worth it for every single person to come forward?
I think the main thing is that whistleblowers need to be assured that they're not on their own when they make these disclosures. There's the legislative aspect, which is important, but we also need, again, a societal shift so that whistleblowers, when they blow the whistle, are not ostracized from their communities, which is something that we frequently see. They're regarded as troublemakers. We need that kind of mindset shift within the communities, and we need kind of creative suggestions and innovations. So things like free counseling, mental health support, things like financial support if there is some kind of financial detriment that they experience, legal advice, legal representation if necessary. So if you provide these raft of services to whistleblowers and people know that there's these types of services out there, I think there'll be a lot more confidence in doing the right thing and blowing the whistle. We as a society actually need to step up and say that we will carry and support people who do the right thing.
When secretive deals with large mining corporations pose a threat to ancestral land and food sources, whose responsibility is it to protect the community leaders who speak out in defense of their homes and livelihoods? These questions and more when we return. This is The Big Debate. Welcome back. You're watching The Big Debate. Today we are talking about whistleblowing, people who risk their lives and livelihoods to call out corruption and malpractice. In 2002, rare minerals were discovered on the Xolobeni coast, and an Australian company was granted the right to mine them. The cost? Up to 70 families faced the risk of eviction and the loss of ancestral and agricultural land. After extensive legal battles by the community, the mining rights were revoked in 2011. But in March 2015, the company filed another mining application through a subsidiary. A year later, one of the main community members opposing the mining, Sikhosipi Bazuka Khadebe, was gunned down outside his home. It was a very traumatic time for your community, Nontle.
Yeah, it's true. When we win this court case in 2018, November, we were just celebrating, hoping that it's over. But we're lying to ourselves. It's not over yet. Because after the government decided to say that they're going to appeal against their own community, that they have no right to choose, they have no right to decide. It's only the state and the private companies can decide. Since then, it's not only the mining that they want to build in our land. They want to build the huge highway into our ancestral land. They are even having more plans where they are saying that they're going to build a Dubai in South Africa, which is called Smart City. They were not even so afraid of saying that to build that smart city is going to help those politicians from the ANC to not to go abroad with the money that they steal from the state. They're going to eat the money closer.
Of the
Right
minister
now,
in this department says this is development, Nonhle, that this is for your own good. It's about development.
We are for development, but we are advising the government that the development must come from the people.
And the court actually agreed with you. The Concord did say that communities must be consulted. They have a right to decide how to use their land. They have a right to decide on their development. Deputy Minister, let me bring you in here. I mean, this is really about what it means to be in a diverse South Africa, what it means to hold on to our identities and that which we hold dear. This is about the very definition of development. Your thoughts on that?
We are a democratic country where everybody has the right to express their views. Rights are balanced against other people's rights. Even in this case of Kolobeni and development, I mean, the proposal is around making the N2 shorter. I think the issues were if you move it further south, make the coast more accessible, which is extremely beautiful, you will aid development. I would imagine those are the issues being raised. And I think the other issue is the potential for, I mean, the president had spoken some time about a new city or new cities in South Africa. The entire coastal area, which is undeveloped, is being looked at. So basically, the views of the local people need to be heard, need to be considered, but there's a whole lot of balancing of rights that needs to go on.
Sharice, I mean, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one. I mean, should communities just be quiet? If the government insists that this is something that is good for them, but they're resisting, should they just step back and let the leaders lead?
Well, I think it's actually so important for communities to make their voices heard because development happens and everyone moves on, but they're the ones who are going to be living with the lasting impacts of development. With that said, it is important to take into account the balancing that does take place here. And also, when you elect leaders into representative positions in government, you are also giving them a certain mandate to make decisions on your behalf. But that does not mean that you should be excluded from these processes. So it is very important that communities continue to make their voices heard. And I think the issue here is not just participation, but giving their views due weight in any decision making that follows. And I think that is where that balancing must take place. It's not lip service, it's more than that.
Let's just hear what our audience has to say about this. I mean, anybody in the audience, do you have anything to add to what we are discussing? Sean?
I just wanted to quickly touch on the legislative intervention part. I think while it's very important that we have these measures in place, but we also need to recognize the limits of the law. Because if we have law that is not implemented or acted upon, that is a kind of law that is as good as non-existent. So that's why we also need to hold the executive arm of government accountable in terms of whistleblower protection. And just to quickly ask a question, how is government going to actually learn from these interventions in terms of, let's say, gender-based violence, because we've bolstered our jurisprudence in terms of combating GBV, but it still remains a crisis. So how is government going to learn from those kind of interventions that haven't actually yielded the desires that we want, and then try and be innovative and creative in terms of combating these atrocious killings of whistleblowers?
So I hear the Deputy Minister is saying life in South Africa is cheap. That is just an understatement. Human life is not valued at all in South Africa. It is a known fact that we live in a corrupt state where law enforcement agencies, officials are known to be in hardened criminals' payrolls. It's a scary thing to even think about. I can give you examples of cases where whistleblowers have been killed, tragically so. We all know of the case of Roneval Krecher. We all know of a case of Rasuche, a former police officer who was gunned down by the former boyfriend, and the Sindiso Magaka, as well as the recent one that has been gunned down for the PPE tenders. So the list is endless, really.
Deputy Minister, the scale of the problem in South Africa is such that the state can't even promise to take care of whistleblowers. Should the government just admit that it can't solve the problem until it solves corruption?
It's not just government, it's society as a whole. People in South Africa are too willing to pay for things and expect things they're not entitled to. So I think it's a general societal problem, although it's something very much that government has got to deal with. In the cases that Mxolisi gave, I mean, Precher is in jail. The Rasucha case, which was femicide, the killer is in jail. The Magaka case is ongoing. That also, since democracy, our police commissioner, Jackie Salebi, being sentenced to imprisonment. We've had the commissioner of the Western Cape. I think he's currently in custody, having been sentenced for corruption. So action is taken. I don't know if this will help much, but we've lost 2 magistrates post democracy. One was killed in the Western Cape in the time of Pagad, and his case was never solved. We then had a magistrate, Victor Mabunda, who was murdered in January 2018. And the case was solved, and the person involved, found guilty of killing him, was a person who he was presiding over the case of, and this person was being charged with selling drugs in prison. And, you know, the horrific thing with that is that to try and stop yourself being found guilty, you go and kill the magistrate. I mean, that's horrific. We've got to, as a society, become a lot less violent. If I can just, while I'm on the floor, raise Sean's issues. We're trying to learn the whole time. Each time we're looking at how to improve. It's not an easy thing because the law has other consequences. So, for example, with whistleblowing, which is very important, you will sometimes find that somebody who's being fired or being disciplined for corruption, for a whole lot of legitimate problems, will suddenly turn around and say, no, I'm a whistleblower, I'm entitled to protection, I made a protected disclosure. So it is a whole issue of crafting laws that help the good people and aren't able to be abused by the bad people.
We complain about corruption in our country all the time. But the whistleblowers who expose the details find themselves treated like traitors within the very communities they seek to protect. Why don't we care? We'll discuss this next. Welcome back to the big debate on whistleblowing. It gets said a lot that people are traitors or they are snitches or they are impimpi. This is what people are often called when they report wrongdoing, even in their communities. And I do want to hear from you if you've ever been a whistleblower. As an audience member, have you ever been a whistleblower? Just wave at me if you have been. There are quite a few people who've been whistleblowers. Okay, let's hear from our audience then.
You know, I've been 2016, I've witnessed a murder. And 3 years back, I testified in court. Now, the minister, you know, makes me sad because I feel excuses being made and we're not really touching the crux of the matter. The solutions for me is we have parastatals of government. Why is the Human Rights Commission not doing its mandate by the people? That is one. As a state witness has been violated with my family, we had to leave everything in the wrap of a moment. 3 years later, we're not receiving our house, and that is not just national government. I'm speaking local government as well, because it is the city's obligation to see to it that we as a family have a home. Have they done it? No, they have not. They've made excuses. My youngest granddaughter was 4 months when we had to leave abruptly, when my house was shot through, almost all of them dead. No social development stepped in. The city police came to the crime scene that night. They told my children to walk on their own to the police station.
I'm so sorry about Red Roshanda, and just hearing the trauma and the fear that you've been living under, and yet you still are here speaking up.
I believe there is a need for a change in the 1960s new public management. I think that is the problem, because these private-public partnerships are based on nepotism and corruption. And like there is often a conflict of interest when it comes to the PPPs, because politicians have a conflict of interest where they have a shareholder buy-in with the corporations that they use for exchanging the public service delivery with.
I put up a little graphic behind me. It's got 3 pillars. I'm a social worker that's been working with whistleblowers, several of the people that are here today. So I've been going around this for about 15 years of trying to understand what is wrong with our society and our systems. I've written to Zondo with a proposal for an approach to dealing with whistleblowers that there's not just about protection, it's also about support. It's about people getting psychosocial support. And the third pillar, it's about the media being a safe harbor and a place where people have refuge. The media, I also believe, need to up their game. In my report, I talk about a whistleblower who left this country because he was fearing for his life in 2008 and has now experienced reputable journalists misrepresenting his story and making him the scapegoat. So I want to just say that maybe there's another big debate about the role of the media in how to take forward truth-telling when power is so resistant to hearing it.
I think that's such an important matter, John. It is absolutely crucial. We have Thabiso in the audience. Thabiso, I believe that you were friends with the late Sindiso Magaqa. I believe so. What do you want to share with us today?
The late Sindiso Magaqa gave me documents in 2016, and he was later shot and killed in 2017. There is a counterintelligence report that places his death in the hands of the state. As whistleblowers, as an anti-corruption activist, we are no longer being killed by criminals and dirty and crook politicians. We are now being killed by the state. The gun that killed Sindiso Magaqa was procured through slush fund. The grey Mercedes Benz that was used in his killing was procured by 3 crime intelligence operatives. When my mother was threatened with rape by police, that was an operation that was led by crime intelligence. When I was shot on the 26th of October in 2019, that operation involved police who wanted to assassinate me as they've assassinated Magaqa. I have heard the Deputy Minister saying the people that were involved in the killing of Magaqa are now on trial. What he is not telling the public is that those are only foot soldiers. The crime intelligence officials that were involved in his killing are not in the dock. The senior politicians of my own organization, the African National Congress, who ordered his killing, are not in the dock. Lastly, if our government wants to deal with the issues of protecting whistleblowers, this thing of taking the anti-corruption activists and human rights defenders away from their homes and take them to go and live in witness protection doesn't work, because it means we are removing the only voices that are in the communities that are supposed to advocate, that are supposed to speak out on things that are going wrong.
I'm also part of the whistleblower support group, and I've been helping whistleblowers submit affidavits to the Zondo Commission. But the area that we're not touching is the extent of corruption that's affecting the lives of rural people. There's been massive corruption in allocating land claims, offering people compensation for the land that they claimed, and all of that money disappears. So we find ourselves people coming long distances to Kulumani support group to get assistance. They have tried all the structures in their provinces. All the structures are colluding together. And it's a huge problem because probably of all people in the country, they have the least access to justice. At Mutsi, there's an Ntwani Community Development Forum that has managed to get rid of all nepotism in their municipality. And I hope that's going to be a model for all of us going forward.
My concern right now is that we've got Minister Jeffries in the audience, and we as Active Citizens Movement have written a letter to the Department of Justice, and nothing has happened. We've made a list of demands, and we've also made recommendations to the change of the legislation for the Protected Disclosures Act. Nothing has happened to date. I'm actually very disappointed that Minister Jeffries is saying there that they've already worked on the legislation. When you notice that something is not working, you start
listening why, and you investigate and you act. What has Minister Jeffries done currently? I'd like to know in his personal capacity as Minister of Justice to make a difference for whistleblowers.
I'm a governance and human rights activist, having served recently in the presidency and the SIU on helping to finalize the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. We can't deny, having listened to all the whistleblowers and what's going on in the country, we are heading towards a failed state. With my background, we work together with colleagues in the ACM, Active Citizen Movement, as well as Citizens for Conscience, and we tabled a submission to the Zondo Commission, as well as to the presidency on constitutional reforms. We will also be forwarding it to Deputy Minister John Jeffrey and Minister Lamola early next week and seek an audience with him, and hopefully engaging civil society to make a difference. We'll report back to this group as well as citizens nationally. Thank you, Ridi.
From lost livelihoods, assassinations, unemployment, enduring insults like Mbimpi, Askari, traitors, why are we not doing more to protect whistleblowers? Can we use the law? Can we improve the law to protect them? You're watching The Big Debate. Welcome back to The Big Debate. We've heard that whistleblowers in South Africa are victimized, isolated, and even killed. Where is the political will to protect citizens who speak up against theft, malfeasance, and greed? Let's hear closing comments from our panel. We will start with you, Nontle, in Kolobeni. Just final thoughts from you.
What we want to see happening from our government, consultation, it's not enough. Because consultation is where you're coming to just to tell people, but they have no right to decide. But our government just to recognize the right to say no, where it gives the people to decide, it gives the people to think. At the moment, that right is not there in our community. That is why mostly the things are just being imposed. That's my comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Musilo, I know that you've written a book, Uncaptured, but I'm sure you've got final thoughts to share on this topic.
My first experience with the media was with the Sunday Times. My lawyers decided to give them my statement that I made to the CCMA. And I said to them, if you publish the story, you've put a gun to my head. And I fulfilled my constitutional right. They only quoted the constitutional right and not putting a gun to my head. And then they put me at risk because I went to Tulima Donsela anonymously, calling Eric and Ward and Salim Issa, telling them that I went to the public protector. And they printed, I'm a liar, a fraudster, a thief, and criminal charges are imminent, and they did. But on the other hand, I have to thank Jessica Behosenhold, who wrote a wonderful piece about how to bleed a whistleblower dry that Plav saw. And then, of course, Sigonati Manjanja, who wrote in the Financial Mail that I took a bullet for South Africa and I'm about to declare for bankruptcy. Rob Shooter of MTN saw that article and gave me a contract. So the media has played a very positive role in mine. Going forward, the Zondo Commission's report is coming. There will be others who will be criminally indicted. I have been told that I may have to be a state witness. So I ask the Deputy Minister, when now we are at trial, what kind of security are you going to give me? And the rest of whistleblowers, thus far you have failed me, and I do not trust the state to protect a state witness that exposed the state in corruption.
It discourages witnesses to come forward if they're not guaranteed of protection. Cherise, final thoughts from you.
The time for talk is over and there's really a need for action. And as somebody who's advocated for enhanced protections for whistleblowers, I was actually disheartened when I heard President Ramaphosa making his statements after Mr. Deokaran's murder, because it was just another indication of empty words. If you look at the value that whistleblowers add to society, they take the information that they have and try to bring it to the attention of people who can act on it. In that small action, they pay such a huge price. And yet, where, as we've seen with the recoveries of looted assets that has happened, we as a society benefit. So when we are advocating for whistleblower protections, like, for instance, providing legal advice and support, there's a cost to it, and government needs to bear that cost because, as a whole, it is a good investment.
Deputy Minister, your final thoughts.
Thanks, Freddie, and thanks to everybody. I think it's been a very informative program. I just particularly want to take to respond to Tabiso Zulu, who had said, I'm not telling everything because the people up for Simiso Magaqa's murder is they're just the foot soldiers, and yes, they are. Unfortunately, it's the foot soldiers that often lead the police to the masterminds, and I do hope that they do that and that matter is able to be cracked, because the information that is there is horrific. And the same with the Babita Deokaran. It seems that they've got the hitmen. I hope they lead to the people behind the actual killing, because those are the most important people. As I said, we did revise the Protected Disclosure Act coming into effect in 2017. It's a pity that some of the proposals, it seems, were not made then, but we will have to relook at what they are. But look, we need to protect whistleblowers. We need to address the issue of the legal costs that they may have to face. Wasilo, we will engage offline on this, but it would obviously be the NPA to ensure that your security is there. There is the Witness Protection Act. But the issue basically from government side, we will do all we can to protect and assist whistleblowers. We will look at improving the law where we can, but legislative reform is quite a difficult or a longer term process. We also need to ensure that the law is implemented properly, and particularly with that, we rely on people to tell us where it's not being implemented properly. So we can deal with those relevant officials that are behind that. But I think the key point I really want to make is this is a huge problem, and really to appeal to everybody to work together to combat corruption, to protect whistleblowers, and ensure that we live in a better country.
How can we say that South Africa is one of the most progressive democracies in the world when corruption still largely goes unpunished and whistleblowers are hunted and gunned down in front of their children? We have heard and seen that speaking up comes at a high cost. This is a deterrent against others who might wish to expose wrongdoing. Can we trust our leaders to protect people of conscience? Can we do the same as members of community? Are we doing enough as citizens to celebrate and support those who speak out? You decide. I'm Ridi Klabi, and you've been watching The Big Debate.